Welcome to the Hennessy's House with me, your host, Nicole Hennessy. Today we're going to talk with Aly Pain. She is a relationship specialist, been married for 23 years, and has 2 teen boys. Her passion comes from growing up in her own circumstances with dysfunctional relationships. We are going to go into so much depth that this is a 3-part episode. Here we go with part 2. Part 2 with Aly Pain is all about setting boundaries. What do boundaries look like? How do I make my boundaries stick and be consistent with them? And how to communicate my boundaries better to the people around me. Can we talk about, we've talked about boundaries a few times, right? Like boundaries on damaging the house, boundaries on how you're allowed to talk to your parent. Like, it's not okay for your kid to be mad and walk up and say, you know what, F you. Like, there's a boundary there, right? Or should be. There is in my house. I try.
Yeah, mine too.
But I personally have really for years struggled with boundaries, and that comes from even relationship boundaries. There was my marriage was in a very bad place years ago, and my husband's a wonderful man, but he was going through some of his own stuff, and I was trying to tell him that he had to stop that stuff, right? And so at first, to me, boundaries looked like, I'm going to say, you can't do this anymore, or I'm going to divorce you. You can't do this anymore, or I won't talk to you for a day, or what, like, these are my boundaries. And really what I was doing was trying to control him. I wasn't setting a boundary. I was saying, well, if you do this, I'm going to do that. And I think there's a lot of confusion, and I, even with my therapist, trying to work through that of like, she's like, you need to set boundaries. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what does it really truly mean? Can you give some examples of some healthy boundaries and like what that really looks like, and the difference, right? The difference of a boundary is, how am I going to respond if these things happen? Not how am I going to treat this person if this happens?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so excited we're on this topic. And for everybody listening, I'm going to work something out with Nicole right here, right now, because I have 2 downloads about this that I would love to be accessible in wherever this is posted at a later date. So we will work that out. I promise you right now. What you were talking about is a normal response to not getting what feels right. And that sounds like a threat or an ultimatum. Threats and ultimatums are about controlling. They are about creating compliance. They are about commanding, and they are transactional. I do this, you do that. Transactional. That's not a relationship. It's a natural response, but that's not a constructive relationship. There's also, outside of threats and ultimatums, then there's, what's the difference between a boundary and an expectation? Well, is there a difference? And I've been really noodling this one over the last 6 months. So that's why I came up with this handout and did a presentation for a couple people about it. An expectation sounds nicer than a threat and an ultimatum, but ultimately it still comes from a place of compliance, because I'm projecting what I want and need on someone else. I am expecting someone else to behave in a way that makes me feel better. A boundary at its core is about ownership. I own my experience. I own my feelings, and I own my behavior and my thoughts. I own them all. And when I get clear, boundaries are clear, I come from a place of compassion. Okay. And it takes a lot of courage. So clarity, compassion, and courage is what's required to set a boundary. Now, let's say you and I are in relationship, and I am often, yeah, right? I love it. And you are, let's talk about the dishes, because dishes are, dishes and laundry. Those are big in a house. So let's say I'd say to you, the dishes aren't being done. Okay. And I could say, Nicole, I feel really disrespected when I see that the dishes aren't done on the nights that are your nights. So we're predisposing that you and I have a negotiated agreement. Okay. And negotiating an agreement is also setting a boundary. And, but we'll get into that. So let's say that you don't do the dishes, so then I come to you and I own my experience. I feel really disrespected when I see the dishes aren't done on those nights. Then I let you know my feelings about it. What's the impact? So when I walk into the kitchen in the morning and the dishes haven't been done, I feel instantly more stressed, and I find it harder, especially right now when I'm working from home, to be calm and to be present to get the work that I need done, because the kitchen is still a mess.
Yeah.
Then I say to you, not do them or else, not, because we're back into ultimatums and threats. Then I say, what would it take for you to get the dishes done? How can I help you to get the dishes done? Okay. Now you might say, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Let's pretend you're a teen. I was on with my phone. I was gaming with my friends. I was blah, 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 whatever. Okay, well, what would it look like, Nicole, for you to put a reminder in your phone, maybe for a couple hours before or something, so that the dishes can get done by, let's say, 10 o'clock, because then there's not a bunch of clanging when I'm trying to go to bed either. Would that work for you? Oh, that might work.
Or
Right?
I don't want to set a reminder in my phone. What happens in that
Yeah.
situation?
So then we might have to just renegotiate it, because there is a reality that when I'm negotiating, so if you're talking about a parent and a teenager, I'm the parent. So ultimately, I'm the parent. Do I want to pull the power card on that? No, not as infrequently as possible. However, sometimes it just comes down to, look, in my house, and this is true for us, I have a motto. Our motto is, we win as a team and we lose as a team. We don't all do the same things on the team, because that would be dumb. We all do different things on the team. But if any one of us doesn't do the things on the team that we need to do, the team falls down.
It's a good
And
analogy.
so, one of mine is making sure I get my work done and that there's money in the account to buy the groceries. My husband and I tag team on who gets the groceries. Our kids are older now, and so they are responsible for cooking dinner one night a week. And so they are responsible for telling us what they want to make the week before. So it goes on the grocery shopping list, because it's when it's your night to cook dinner and you didn't think about what there was to make. Do not look to me. You better search the cupboards and figure it out. So it's not about rescuing, but a boundary is about clearly identifying what is the experience that I want and why does it matter to me. That's not the other person's problem. That's mine. It's my work to do that clarity. Then I need to express it as a request or negotiation. It is not a command. Now you're back into threats and ultimatums. So during this COVID pivot for me, I've gone from working, 9 to 6, 5 days a week, to working kind of 8 to 8, 6 days a week, trying to relaunch a new business. And so my house has completely changed. I cook one night a week. That's it, one night a week. Because the other 3 members of the house, who are older, so different if you have younger kids, are capable, and they are pitching in ways that I just never even imagined.
And side note, while we're on that topic, if you're a single parent or you have a spouse that's outside of the house working in the evenings, there is no shame in feeding your kids a bowl of cereal one night if that's what you need to do to get through your day, right?
Hell yeah.
I think there's so many moms out there that just guilt themselves into feeling like, I've got to have it all together. I mean, there's days that my kids eat leftover waffles, or I am like, pick and choose. I have tortillas and shredded cheese. How's nachos? Like, because there's days that I lose track of time and I just can't do it all. And there's no shame in that.
No, there's absolutely no shame. And this is part of when we're setting that boundary, is we set them for ourselves too. Because you see, boundaries are about what works for me and what doesn't, so that I feel respected, safe, at its foremost, respected and safe. Now, so when I come at a boundary and it sounds like an invitation to you, as opposed to a command and you must go do, which I guarantee you is going to get a defensive response, because I don't know about you, but I don't love being told what to do and when and where and why.
Never.
So, right? So setting a boundary sounds like an invitation, because I've done the work to get clear, and I have compassion for myself and understanding why it's important to me. Now I can come to you compassionately and courageously and say, I feel afraid when we don't balance our budget and too much is spent on groceries. I feel afraid. How can you help me? Are you willing to help me with this? This is what I need to feel safe. What do you need to feel safe? So you see, it's more of a caring, compassionate conversation than a
Yeah.
commanding compliance expectation. That's a boundary. Ultimately, it's ownership. I'm not expecting anyone else to create my experience. Now, it is okay, although unfortunate, and it's a whole other conversation. If someone says, no, I'm unwilling to respect that boundary. I'm unwilling. Okay, well, then you have a choice whether you want to be in that relationship or what that
Yeah.
relationship's going to look like. But then, see, you still don't get to resort to threats and ultimatums because they
Right.
still don't work.
Right. And that is a tough one. And that's especially, I mean, that's especially hard when you're talking about your children, right? Because
Yes.
it's a little different. I mean, if you're at a marriage and there's a lot of complications happening in your marriage and there's no respect of boundaries and no room for people to try to improve on themselves, then yes, ultimately you have a choice to walk away from that marriage, even if it's scary and hard. You can be okay. You will be okay again. It's just going to be scary and hard for a little while, right? Like nobody should stay in an unhealthy, toxic relationship where someone doesn't respect their boundaries.
Right.
So that is a real reality for some people, especially right now with COVID, right? Especially in this moment,
Especially.
be like to all
Yes.
those people, men and women that are in any type of relationship that feels unhealthy and you feel devalued and you're communicating it respectfully and you're not getting the response you want. I know this is really hard, but it's okay to walk away from that, right?
Yes.
But as
Yes.
far as children go, that's a whole different ballgame because I was in a situation growing up where I was very hard to handle. And my parents were divorced and I lived with my mother. And I was very quick to be like, screw you, mom, you can't tell me what to do. And it was minor stuff at that point. I was middle school. But my mom was a very emotional person and she's very sensitive. She's a very sensitive, loving, kind person. And me telling her, screw you, was like very hard for her emotionally. And so it got to the point where she said, I can't handle you. You have to go live with your dad. I can't do this. So she took me to my dad's. And then in my brain, I'm like, wow, I'm really hard to deal with. I must be a jerk. Right. And then my dad and his wife and I didn't get along. And she said, you can't live here anymore. Right. So then I was like, fine. And he said, you have to leave. You're causing too many problems. So I was like, wow, I'm a really big problem. But in reflection, I wasn't a big problem. Like I had an attitude for sure, but I was not doing anything dangerous or abusive or, I wasn't that. It wasn't, nobody was in danger around me. However, that's like setting the boundary of like, you're too much to handle. So I'm going to cut off this relationship. But when you're talking about a teenager that's being a teenager or a middle schooler being a middle schooler or a 8-year-old that's like, I'm not going to do that. You can't be like, well, okay, I'm just going to quit parenting then. Like, that's not a
Well,
healthy.
it's not, but I love that you brought this up because it is so important. I get these messages from parents all the time that they did effectively set a boundary, like no having your boyfriend or girlfriend over for the night, or
Right.
we don't use that kind of language in this house. You can use it outside the house, but in this, so they've set a clear boundary, not out of spite or hatred, and the teenager has chosen not to follow that boundary, and the relationship has gotten toxic enough that they have asked the teenager to leave. And I can't even imagine being a parent in that situation. I cannot imagine.
Yeah.
Zero judgment. I respect that there was a boundary that I believe, I don't know the whole story, that it was clearly set. There was clear reminders when it was broken or stepped over. And then finally it got to, no, that is my boundary. I love you. I don't love your behavior. And it
Yeah.
continues to violate my boundary. And so this is just such a trying thing for parents and teens, because I get a lot of teens also saying, and in my experience, I was also quite a handful, bit of a spitfire. And I was that way though, because I felt my home environment was so toxic and so wrong, and I didn't know how else to change it. So I became a bit of a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And that wasn't kind and it wasn't fair. And at the same time, I knew exactly why I was doing it, but nobody asked me. And so, my parents considered having me live elsewhere as well. And so for the kids, for teenagers who are messaging me and saying, this is toxic, they keep treating, this is not right, and that they need to leave, bless you too. I mean, again, I don't know the whole situation, but it goes both ways, that when we can't respect each other's boundaries or choose not to,
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes we do need to change that situation. And it is extremely hard for both the parent and the teenager. And
Yeah.
there's
It's
lots of, that's a whole other topic, right? But
Well,
it's
and then
hard.
forgiving yourself, right? If that is a
Yes.
circumstance, because like imagine the amount of guilt you would
Oh
feel
gosh,
on
yes.
top of all the other guilt. I mean, there's definitely a time and a place when you need to find other arrangements, right? I mean, yes, having, somebody that they're in an intimate relationship with sneaking into your house on a regular basis to spend the night is completely inappropriate if that's a boundary you have set. That's a big
Right.
one.
Right.
Or, bringing drugs into your house
Yes.
and or stealing from you, or,
Yep.
there are big major things where like that's okay, right? That like at some point it becomes a power issue and a control, and it's like you can try to ground me all you want, but I don't have to follow that. I can just walk out the damn door and you're not strong enough to stop me, because now at this point I'm bigger than you, right? And I mean, I don't know, not in every case, but my teenager is definitely taller than me and a volleyball player, so I mean, I'm not physically stopping her from walking out the door if I tell her she can't, so there are times in a place where you have to go, well, this is all I can do. This is the only control I can have over my home.
Right.
And,
Right. And that even though I feel extremely hurt that you violated a boundary of mine, I love you.
yeah,
I will always love you. This boundary is so not negotiable for me. I've tried, and I'm not getting that you're getting it and respecting it. And I love you. It Boundaries don't ever mean that I don't love and care about you. They also mean
yeah.
I love and care about myself enough that sometimes I got to draw a very uncomfortable line in the sand.
And that's not even just children. That's dealing with loved ones that have addiction problems.
Yes.
I mean, that's a huge piece of that. Like you can
Yes, it
still,
is.
I have a sister who is a recovered drug addict, and there was a huge portion of our adult lives where I very much so just completely disconnected from her. A hundred
Yes.
percent. There was no communication.
Right.
And that I never stopped loving her or
Yes.
valuing her purpose. It
Right.
was just a matter of, wow, this is too much for me. I can't get through to her. I've tried, and she's going to have to figure this out on her own. And I really hope she does. I hope she gets the help she needs. I hope she gets better. And I hope that the next call I get from her is not someone calling me to tell me I'm invited to her funeral. Right.
Right.
And,
Right.
and that was a choice I had to make, which was really hard to make. But it's that same, it's that same boundary. It's that at the end of
Yeah.
the day, if something is really causing you more harm than good, and you know that you cannot be a sane, normal person in your own way that looks, if this thing continues to be around you, you either remove yourself from it or you ask them to remove themselves from it. You can't continue any relationship when it gets that bad.
No. And unfortunately, when you do it, it's about doing it always, because boundaries are about compassion, doing it from a compassionate place that says, I love you. I love you a lot. And this is
Yeah.
literally ripping my heart out. And
Yeah.
I have decided this is a boundary I am not willing to negotiate on. And I want this to be different. And I love you. And I will always, like
Yeah.
it's a really tricky place. I mean, you've certainly been through, a bunch of this, and I know you've taken a lot of heat on it too, just on, with your daughter and your own experience as a teen mom too, and
Right.
what that looked like. Around There was a lot of boundaries around that, like for you, and boundaries, with you and your daughter and what you have already been through.
Well, I mean, that's our current circumstances, is still trying to figure out boundaries, right? I mean, this is all new
Yes.
to both of us. We have a 3-month-old grandbaby living in our house, and she does 100% of the parenting, 100%. I mean, I help her when she's in class if she needs it or whatever, but she's the mom. And that was the very first boundary. It was, if this was your choice, let's make it clear. I don't want more babies. I will love this baby. I will spoil this baby, but I am not his mama. I am not getting up in the middle of the night with him. I am not changing his poopy diapers every day. I'm not going to sit there for a half hour feeding him every day. That's your job. You're
Mhm.
signing up for that.
Yeah.
And we've made that very clear. And that's the current consequences in our house. If she's super disrespectful, if she's having a really hard, frustrating time with him and it's turning into coming out on me, because let's face it, and this is important for everyone to understand, right? And should, I am her safe place, right? I am
Mhm.
the person that she knows no matter what, at the end of the day, loves her, and which all parents should provide that for their children. So if she knows that, she's not going to freak out on her baby because he won't nap today or didn't sleep last night. She's a good mom. She's not going to start yelling at her infant. So she's going to be easily triggered by me, and
Yes.
it's going to come out on me. And so that boundary is like, she gets angry with me and I had planned to help her in that afternoon with whatever I'm going to say. I don't really like being talked to that way. And because of the way you're talking to me, I'm going to choose to take time for myself. Like, I don't really want to do for someone when they treat me this way. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the only thing in our house right now that's seeming to be a quite understanding, that we show love and appreciation for each other. And when we don't, we're going to take some space from each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
know?
and that we own our feelings.
Yeah.
That if I come to you and I'm pissy, that I say, not against you or at you, I can be ugly snot crying and saying, I am so tired and he won't sleep. And I can be, but none of it is saying you're a bad person. You are my safe place. And so I'm still coming to you and saying, I'm so tired. This is so hard. I don't want this today. I don't want to. And then you can be like, yes, yes, honey. Yes. All of that. Yes. But
Hmm.
because I owned my feelings and I didn't take it out or project it on you, which
Yeah.
is very hard at 17.
Yeah.
It's a different place. I do want to say too about boundaries that I just did a TikTok on this yesterday and it's gone a little bit crazy. Boundaries are something I often don't know I need until it's I'm okay, in quotations, too late. Now when I say too late, I just mean I'm feeling really resentful, I'm feeling angry,
Yeah.
and that's okay. None of those feelings are wrong. Those are the red flags to hold on. Sounds like there's a negotiation of a boundary that needs to happen here. And the compassion for myself to go, well, I haven't lived this whole life before. I haven't been in all these relationships before. How would I have known to set that boundary before? I wouldn't have. So, okay, here's the red flag. Ding, ding, ding. Yay. So dial it back when I have a second by myself to go, okay, what was it about that was bothering me? Why was I upset? What did I want to happen? Great. How do I go back in there and negotiate that so that I have the boundary in the future? So we don't grow up knowing what boundaries are. We don't grow up with boundaries. We only know to set them when we realize something feels violated. So be compassionate with yourself about that, because they don't come pre-installed. It's not like software.
Right. Isn't that the truth? I know it
Yeah,
is. It's a hard thing. Boundaries
they
are a
are
hard
hard.
thing to understand and define, and to stay consistent with,
Yes.
I think, is like
Yes.
one of the hard parts. And I think a lot of things we do as parents sometimes is, I swear, even with my 6 and 9-year-old, I feel like I'm negotiating
Yes.
all, like, a lot.
Yeah.
And negotiation doesn't have to be a bad thing, but if you're setting a boundary, there really is no negotiating that. It's, like, even little things, like, my 6-year-old, I'll be like, it's time to go to bed. And he'll be like, I'll go to bed in 10 minutes after I play this game, or I'll go to bed if tomorrow morning you'll make me waffles. And I'm like,
Wow.
no, punk, you're going to go to bed if or without waffles tomorrow. Like, it's not.
But this is that's such a great example, because they are asserting independence. They're asserting their own likes and dislikes. So when there's a boundary is the hard line in the sand. Although most boundaries, I will say, have a gray area that leads up to the boundary. The boundary itself is not a gray area, but there's a gray area kind of right in front of the boundary where our lovely children teens, tweens, children, or whatever, love to insert some independence and autonomy and tell you how it's going to go. And so you're right. You decide how much of that is negotiable and not. Now, when he's saying, I'll go to bed right now if you make me waffles, that is a transaction. That is not relational. That's saying, no, I'll do this if you do this. No, we don't buy each other's behavior here. That's not how this works. Yeah. We are respectful with each other. And so I have someone else telling me this about their 5-year-old. She'll like set a boundary, and her daughter will say, okay, but I would like to do it this way. And she's like, yeah, she'll decide. She's like, yeah, that's fine, do that as long, but this is the hard line and here's the gray area. And so, yeah, man, kids are asserting themselves all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I think they always do. Yes. And I think like 3 and up, especially, right? 3 and up, it's like, get ready for your boundaries to be tested every day until they move out and they're independent. Like, just be ready, parents. Yeah. But and some of it is comical, right? Like, it's like, did you just tell me you'll sleep if I make you walk? Like, that's like, not happening.
Did you really just do that? No.
So some of it is cute and amusing when they're younger. And I think that goes to the point of, I have an interesting dynamic, which happens, but it's not all the time, with having very young children and also having adult children, right?
Yes.
So it's an interesting dynamic that I can see so many perspectives all under one roof.
Right.
And so one thing that I see now, and we're always trying to do better, right? I always tell my oldest when she goes, you didn't do that with me. And I'm like, well, I learned my mistakes with you. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. You were the firstborn. So you're always learning and changing and developing and trying to do better as a person individually and with your children and with your spouses. And one thing I've really noticed is you've got to be careful not to make those cute, funny little negotiations a thing, because then you're setting a precedent for what things look like in your house. And now, like, you do that one time, and I've made that mistake. I mean, we all do, but I've made that mistake where I've just been like, listen, if you go to bed right now, I will give you Roblox points tomorrow for Roblox or whatever it is. And then he's like, score. And then it's like every night for the next week, I have to say, no, I'm not going to do that every night. Like, you just have to go to bed. Right. You set this precedent of like a negotiation for something, a little bribe for certain circumstances. Fine. Right.
Yeah, for sure. But it's such a good point, because I mean, as parents, we just get, especially young children, or teens, I don't know, it's all the same. We get so taxed and feeling so at the end of our rope that we dive into this land of, imagine a relationship being a grocery store. Well, if I go in and buy this, you have to pay me this. Well, if I go in and do this, then you do this. It's like for every action, that is not a relationship. Right. That will become toxic. It is a coping technique. I totally get it, did it myself. And you do it sometimes and you backpedal and you make it better the next day. But as a whole, like as an entire whole, that does not teach little humans how to participate in a relationship, because number one, they also are not learning what authority is. And this has actually been studied, is that since 1960, children are being given more and more and more authority that belonged to the parent in previous generations. And this is why we have such entitled children in this generation, because they're being allowed to set their own limitations and allowed to set their own boundaries. And that is not workable as a whole. And so when we are requiring them to come to the relationship as a person that cares and respects for the person they're in relationship with, not as a transaction or a means to an end, that is a larger conversation, larger scale relationship skill that we're using by setting boundaries, opposed to the bribes or the transactions, which again, I'm not, well, look, I did them myself. Right. It is what it is. But
you save it. Just save them though, for those times you really need it. And also just be prepared that when you do that, probably for the next week, they're going to try the same thing every day.
100%.
Like, you just mentally prepare yourself is all I'm saying, right? You just be ready to be like, no, we don't do that every time.
That was a special circumstance. And And that's what the thing about boundaries is, which I want to make clear too, is that you will need to restate your boundaries, and you will need to restate them over and over and over. And I don't
Yeah.
care if it's with a child or another adult. And here's why I want to encourage you to continue to do that compassionately and respectfully, because that other person is not you. They don't feel what you feel. They don't think what you think. And so they're just out in the world doing them. They're just being them. And so they're going to bounce up against your boundaries on a relatively regular basis.
Yes.
And so it is up to you to remind them of the boundaries, because whose boundaries are they? Yours. So if you want to hold that boundary, I understand if it's being crossed hundreds of times. Yes, you might want to consider that relationship and what's going on in there. But on the occasion, especially for young kids, and a new boundary, whether you set it with an adult or a teen, a new boundary is going to need to be recommunicated over and over until you think you're a broken record.
Yeah.
Keep doing it respectfully, keep doing it compassionately.
And find ways to make your own life easier. And, I'm dealing with this with our 17-year-old. So I can give this example of the little ones keep waking up the baby. Right.
Yes.
So like
Yes.
he's taking a nap and they forget he's sleeping and they run through the room and she's like, you need to tell them they have to be quiet. And I was like, they're 6 and 9. I'll tell them every day, but in an hour, they'll forget. Like
Yeah.
they're going to keep forgetting. So I told her, just make life easier. Let's make a sign. We'll have the kids make it. We can sit down and have a discussion about like when this sign is up from this point further in the house, you need to be tiptoeing because it means Cameron is asleep.
Right.
And she's like, well, I shouldn't have to put up a sign. They just need to be quiet. And
Mm,
I'm like, okay, well, this is a good life lesson for you, darling, because we have to find ways. If it's your boundary, it's what you
yes.
need from them,
Yes.
then
Yes.
how can we make that? Because what you're asking for is fair. And what you're asking for, they will respect. But you have to understand that you're dealing with smaller children that are going to forget. They're excited. They have high energy. I mean, they're talking about having to be quiet in our kitchen and bathroom area, right? So that's an area that they often frequently pass. So it's
Yes.
something that needs to be clear as day right in front of their face. And so that was my suggestion. Talk about if you're stressed out about the lights being left on every night because money is tight and you're trying to save money, then as the parent, that boundary keeps getting broken. That doesn't mean take the boundary away, but what can we do? Like maybe you put a post-it note on their door or on their light switch for bed and say, did you turn off all the lights? Question mark. Because if they see that, they'll remember. And then they'll be like, oops, I forgot to do that, because it's not ever intentional. Like you said, they're just doing their own thing and being their own person. And our expectations are not their priorities.
No, and I love what you did with your daughter there, because if the boundary is really important to me, then I'm going to do what I can to bring it into your world that in a way that's meaningful at your level.
Yeah.
Not impose it, but I help you bring it into your world, help you take it in a way that's meaningful. And that is critical. My mom used to charge my sister and I a nickel every time we left the bathroom light on, like far into the hall. I don't know why we'd leave the bathroom light on all the time. And she'd be like, hey, that's enough. She just got tired of asking. And she said, that's enough. You guys owe me a nickel. I'll tell you what, that only happened about 5 times and we never left the bathroom light on again.
Right.
So sometimes there needs to be a reasonable consequence for breaking certain boundaries, and that helps. But I love the sticky note and the reminder as well.
Yeah. Or even with smaller children, sticky notes are a good reminder if they're at age where they can read. If they're not, it's some kind of, pictures that you put up on the wall with like what they're supposed to do every day. Like if, and then they can earn points. So like maybe my son really wants me to make him waffles if he goes to bed on time. What could I turn that into that's not a negotiation? I can say, all right, here's how we can do this. The boundary is you go to bed without a fight, because I hate that. Like everybody loves that bedtime fight. No, I'm not ready. So you turn that into every night that you go to bed without a fight, you get to put this penny in a jar, whatever it is, right? Piece of paper in a cup, whatever. Don't buy stuff. Like just make something out of what you have around the house. And when you have 5, then you get to have waffles for breakfast on Saturday morning.
Right.
And then he gets what he wanted, but also I got to keep my boundary in place and he had to earn it. He had to work towards it, which is an important lesson that kids
It
need.
is. It is. And it builds huge confidence for kids because when they're sitting down for that waffle breakfast and you're reinforcing, this is so great that you did this. Let's talk. What did you dare to do to earn this? And you get them to reinforce. They feel so proud of themselves, so proud and so confident to know that they can learn and they are capable. And those are wonderful things to instill in children. Wonderful. Whether
Yeah.
even a teenager.
Well, and there's so many people that don't have self-love, and
Yes,
this
yes,
is how you develop it, right? I
yes,
mean, there's so many kids that are in circumstances where unfortunately they're not taught how to love themselves, right? That happens all the time. That doesn't mean that they're a lost cause. That doesn't mean they can't learn to love themselves. But if you are a loving parent and you want your children to love themselves, this is how that starts, right? It's those little moments where, Angelina recently had to cook dinner, and then she had her son. She was watching my two kids because I was doing another podcast episode. And she ended up cooking dinner because she realized what time it was and I was still not up there. And got it all done. And I came up, I was like, whoa, you've got Cameron and the bouncer. You cooked dinner for your brother and sister. That's awesome. And I was like, how do you feel right now? And she was, I kind of feel like Wonder Woman. I was like, you should, right? And I was like,
yes,
I was like, look at all these things that you accomplished and you cleaned your room up. And like, she did a bunch of stuff. And she got to see that in that moment that she can do things. She can get it all done when she needs to.
yes,
And I got to say to her, like, wow, how do you feel? You feel awesome? You should feel awesome. That's great. You're so
yeah,
capable, right? And so that's how you build that self-love, right? And with the
right.
smaller kids, it's the same. It's like, wow, you earned waffles for breakfast. Like, it seems so minimal, but it's so important to them. Or when they say, I really want to show you this picture I drew, right? And it's like, wow, that's really, even if it's not
Yeah,
amazing,
it's super
that's
creative.
really creative. And why don't you tell me about it? And how'd you come up with the idea for that? And you're letting them express their thought process and how they do things. And that's building them up,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I guess I want to circle back because I know I'm saying I've said that, relationships are not a transaction. That's not a healthy way to go. Um, it's different, I think, when we're in this sense that we're talking about having children earn certain privileges or having children earn earn certain things. I don't That is not the same as the transactional, I'll only do this if you do this. That's
Right.
different. Earning a privilege is teaching them about consistency, accountability, and responsibility, which lifts and builds them up. Whereas a transactional relationship, I'll do this if you do this, actually teaches them that they have lower value and they are less capable of expressing themselves, asking for what they want, and they have less worth. I know that that's a really fine line distinction, but we've talked about both sides. So I just wanted
Right.
to point that out.
No, I think that's a great point. And it's interesting. Like, I've never thought about the fact that you can so easily turn one of those things into the other.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, it is so simple to be like, if they're trying to do these little, well, I'll do that if you do this situations, then you get to say, well, that's not how this is going to work. We don't trade services to each other, but I
Right.
see that that's something that you really like and seem interested in. We should talk about adding that as a reward for certain things, right?
Yes.
Whatever those need
Yeah.
to be. So you get to take advantage of those times in a way, right? As the parent.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, in teaching them, it's because we live in a very transactional world. I mean, Amazon, right? You go on, like, click the button, it's very, I do this, something happens, technology, kind of transactional world. And so to teach them that relationships are not about being in business with each other. Like, this is not a B2B conversation here.
yeah,
We're in a relationship and it is messier and it's going to take longer and it's going to feel harder. That's because it's a constructive relationship.
yeah,
It's not you're a text, it's not a SMS, it's not an Amazon, it's not an order. And with more and more and more the world becoming transactional at an even younger and younger age, that's really critical to teach kids. That's not the depth of a relationship.
yeah,
That's not it.
yeah. And we want them to have healthy adult relationships when they
Right,
get older, right? So
right.
I mean, I do. Most of
Yeah,
us do. If you're listening to this podcast, it's because you want good things for your children and you also want to better your relationship, right? So
Absolutely.